Cultural diffusion. All right, so the first concept we'll discuss will be cultural regions, and it makes sense for us to first define or discuss what a cultural region is. So what a cultural region is this. It's just a way of dividing, it's a way that geographers, anthropologists, demographers, that you divide the earth, and you do it based, instead of doing it on physical features or physical boundaries or governments, you divide the earth based on cultural characteristics. And when we talk about different cultural characteristics, I want you guys to think about what we discussed, some of the different themes of geography. Everything relates back to the themes of geography. So when we talk about the different cultural characteristics, you want to relate to that. Things like your government, art, social groups, your economic systems, language, religion. Religion is big. Housing and art forms. I want to double back and get to religions, and we'll see what this graphic is. It is a graphic of the world, or it's a map of the world, but divided based on the cultural regions. And you'll see, just kind of briefly going around it, we'll start with Latin America is its own cultural region. They share their own religion, history of art, clothing, all those things in Latin America. Sub-Saharan Africa, which is Africa south of the Saharan Desert, is its own cultural region. Northern Africa is a part of the Islamic cultural region. Then we talk about the South and East Asian cultural region. The Slavic Orthodox Church cultural region that makes up Russia. And then finally, the Western European and American cultural region, and North American cultural region. So this is how we're divided based on similar customs. This is how the world is divided based on cultural regions, as far as people having similar customs. Now we talk about, and what this is all about is cultural change. So this is what the overall theme is of these notes, or this lecture today, is that cultural change. And the question is, what types of things creates change in a culture? Why do cultures change? Well, I'll give you guys a quick new ideals, right? Things that bring in new ideals, lifestyles, inventions, trades, movement of people, and war. These are all ways that culture changes. But I wanted to focus on with these particular illustrations were new inventions, movement of people, movement of ideals, all of these things, the internet, the automobile, airplanes, smartphones, televisions. These are all new inventions, new ways they cause new lifestyles, new ways to move ideals and people. Those are the biggest ways that cultures change. And just to bring us as a review of everything before we move to go too much further in it. What is culture? Well, culture is just the way of life for a group of people. So it's the way of life for a group of people. One of the concepts that we'll get to momentarily will be cultural diffusion. But before we get to it, we've already discussed what a culture is. It is the way of life for a group of people. So now we have to make sure that you guys have a good understanding of the concept. What does it mean to diffuse something? Well, when you diffuse something, it just means to spread it out, to spread or to scatter it. So when we discuss cultural diffusion means to spread or scatter a way of life of people. So the spreading of new knowledge or ideals from one culture to another. This is illustrated with this flowchart detailing how tea was originated in China, but it's something that we drink here, that we drink in the Western world. And this flowchart demonstrates how tea, or it illustrates how tea went from China to Great Britain, and then going to us to the rest of the world. So here we go. And tea was originally cultivated in China. Tea was originally invented in China. The Chinese were the first people to use tea. China was a closed society for much of Chinese history. They did not openly trade with people who were not Chinese. They did not openly trade with African or European cultures. So one of the first successful people to work with China, the first successful adventurers or explorers to trade with China was Marco Polo. So Marco Polo visited China. The Chinese accepted him. He traded with them. And he brought tea back to Europe. So from his trading with China, or from his trading adventures, I guess you can say, I was trying not to use the word adventures, but definitely from his exploration of China, meeting the Chinese people, trading with them, he brought tea back to Great Britain. And once tea became introduced to Great Britain, it became very heavily used in Great Britain. I'm sure you guys have heard of people in Britain, they have tea time. So what we'll do now is discuss or give you guys a couple of instances, or the major instances of cultural diffusion throughout history. And once again, cultural diffusion is just cultural spreading. So the major ways, or the major times that we've had cultural spread, or events that led to mass cultural diffusion throughout history. The first is the agricultural revolution. And what I want you guys to think about is, before the agricultural revolution, early man were nomads. Early man did not, what we were called hunter-gatherers. So the earliest people were we called hunter-gatherers. What that means is that you didn't settle in one place. You followed your food, and you looked for land, and you followed your food, and you followed around with the seasons. You didn't stay in one place at one time. Very few people, if any, stayed in one place at one time. You chased whatever it is that you were hunting or eating. So the word for that were nomads. So the earliest men were what we call nomads, and once again, the technical definition for it is that you have no fixed home. You move from place to place in search of food, water, or grazing land. And this was important because you had to move because we had not developed the techniques of farming yet. All of that changed with the agricultural revolution. So around 10,000 years ago, many of the people who were the nomadic people of this time started settling down. There are some changes in the Earth's climate and the atmosphere that made it possible for people to settle. And where they ended up settling were along river valleys and places that were very fertile, which means that these were places that it was easy to grow crops. So we see is that about 10,000 years ago is when man went from being nomadic to being sedentary. And what this word sedentary means is that settling in one place at one time. And this graphic is just an illustration of someplace. It's in Jordan. It's one of in the Middle East of where the early men settled, one of the spots where early men settled near the Euphrates River. And this you see it's along water. And generally, land that is located along water, you guys have learned that before, it tends to be fertile. So this is one of the places that early man settled. In the agricultural revolution, during the agricultural revolution is when people went from being nomadic to becoming farmers. Now, once people became farmers in the area that they started farming in, we start seeing the first villages. All right, so we start seeing the first villages. We start seeing people grow crops. So we shifted from being hunter-gatherers to being farmers. We shifted from gathering food to producing our own food. And that is the easiest way to define the agricultural revolution. Now, because of the agricultural revolution, we had the development of what we call cultural hearths. And what this illustration shows you is some of the earliest cultural hearths. And what they are, these are just some of the earliest farming villages that developed into large communities or large civilizations. And what you see is that around the world, we have the Northern African civilization. We have India, civilizations in India, in China, and Asia, the Middle East. We have them in Rome and Greece, Central America and Central America. But going back real quick, what is a civilization? I've already discussed the earliest civilizations, and what a civilization is. These are just highly organized cities. What we think of as any time when villages went from being loosely organized villages to highly organized cities and societies, where what we think about today, where you have trade, where you have commerce, where you have government, science, the art. That is civilization. It's important to remember that before this time, Most people did not live in one place at one time. We chased food. We moved around with the seasons, moved around to where it was warm, moved around to where the food was. These first major civilizations that we saw around Earth, that formed around the Earth, are what we call cultural hearse. All right, so once again, they were called the cultural hearse. So all of these major civilizations, what we call culture, were the first cultural hearse. What is a cultural hearse? All right, well, before we do that, what is culture? So going back to reviewing what is culture, once again, culture is just a way of life for a group of people. And what is a hearth? Well, a hearth is a family or home. And so what exactly, putting all that in together, defining what a cultural hearth is, these are just the early civilizations for people. The earliest developing civilizations for people whose ideals and practices spread around the world. So cultural hearth is the way of life for the home, or a way of life for a group of people. In this map, once again, this is another map of the Earth, shows the major cultural hearths that we'll spend time focusing on. You'll see Central America, Northern Africa, the Middle East, India, and Asia, the major cultural hearths that we'll spend time on. All right, that's it, the end. Make sure you highlight your learning targets, and I will see you guys later.